I met Gabriel on a Saturday morning when I was only planning to buy tomatoes. That was the whole mission. I had just moved into a small rental house on the edge of town after deciding I needed a break from the pace of the city. I worked remotely as a graphic designer, and after years of noisy apartments, endless traffic, and neighbors who somehow managed to argue every night, I wanted silence. Fresh air. Something that didn't feel rushed. The weekly farmers market quickly became part of my routine. It wasn't huge, but that was the point. Local vegetables, homemade bread, fresh flowers, handmade candles, and people who actually remembered your name after meeting you once. I usually arrived early before the crowds. That morning, I was carrying a canvas bag and drinking coffee while wandering between stalls without any real plan. Then I noticed the honey stand. It wasn't the jars that caught my attention first. It was the man behind them. He looked like someone who belonged exactly where he was. Dark blonde hair that curled slightly at the ends, sleeves rolled to his forearms, faded jeans, and an easy smile that seemed completely effortless. He wasn't trying to sell people anything. He simply talked about honey the way someone talks about a hobby they've loved for years. An older woman asked which variety would be best for tea. He spent almost 2 minutes explaining the difference between wildflower, linden, and chestnut honey with genuine enthusiasm. When she finally picked one, he smiled like she'd just made his day. I found myself waiting until the line disappeared. Not because I needed honey, because I wanted to hear him talk. When it was finally my turn, he looked up. Morning. His voice was calm, warm, and surprisingly soft. Morning. What are you looking for? I glanced at the rows of glass jars. I have absolutely no idea. He laughed. That's more common than you'd think. I usually just buy whatever looks nice. Then today I'll save you from making a terrible decision. I smiled despite myself. That bad? Oh, definitely. He reached for one of the smaller jars. This one's from early spring. Then another. This one comes from wildflowers near the river. And finally another with honey noticeably darker than the others. This is my favorite. What makes it different? He rested both hands on the table. It isn't sweeter. No. He shook his head. It's deeper. I laughed. That's a very Beekeeper answer. He grinned. I've been told. For the next few minutes, he described flowers, weather, bees, and harvest seasons with the same excitement other people reserve for sports or expensive cars. I barely understood half of it, but I enjoyed listening. I'm Julian, I said while reaching for my wallet. I'm Gabriel. He handed me the jar. First visit. Is it that obvious? You looked overwhelmed. I was hoping I hit it better. You almost did. Almost. I paid, thanked him, and started walking away. After maybe 10 steps, I heard him call after me. Julian. I turned. If you don't like it. He paused dramatically. I'll personally refund you. I raised the jar. That's a bold promise. I'm confident. I laughed all the way home. It wasn't until I unpacked my groceries that I realized I'd spent almost $20 on honey when I'd originally gone out to buy tomatoes. The tomatoes never made it home. Instead, I kept thinking about Gabriel. Not because he was handsome, although he definitely was. It was something else. He looked settled, like someone who genuinely enjoyed his own life. I couldn't remember the last time I'd met someone like that. Most people I knew complained constantly. Their jobs, their schedules, their apartments, their families. Gabriel had spent 10 minutes talking about bees like he'd won the lottery. It was strangely attractive. The following Saturday, I told myself I was returning because I actually needed vegetables. That wasn't entirely true. I walked straight past every stall until I reached the honey stand. Gabriel looked up immediately. I was wondering if you'd come back. I blinked. You remembered me? You bought the dark honey. So. He smiled. I remember everyone who buys the dark honey. I narrowed my eyes. I don't believe you. You shouldn't. He laughed before I could answer. I remembered because you looked like someone who had absolutely no intention of buying honey. I didn't. And yet. He pointed toward the jar inside my shopping bag. You came back. I finished it. His eyebrows lifted. Already. It was good. See. He folded his arms. I told you. I looked over the table. So what happens now? Now. You've already converted me. He pretended to think. I guess now I convince you to try another one. You're very committed. I'm a beekeeper. As a profession. As my whole life. He said it without hesitation. No embarrassment. No apology. Just certainty. I grew up doing it. You never wanted to do something else? Not really. He shrugged. I studied agriculture for a while. Then. I realized I kept thinking about getting back to the bees. I laughed. So you chose the bees. I chose the bees. There was something incredibly refreshing about someone who didn't sound like they were searching for a different life. Most conversations my age eventually became complaints about careers. Gabriel seemed perfectly happy exactly where he was. It made me curious. Is your farm nearby? About 20 minutes from here. You work alone? My grandfather started it. And now? It's mostly me. That sounds like a lot. It is. He smiled anyway. But I like being tired for something I actually care about. I looked at him for a second longer than I probably should have. He noticed. What? Nothing. No. He tilted his head. That was definitely a what look. I was just thinking. Dangerous. I know. I hesitated. I don't think I've ever met someone who actually enjoys answering questions about their job. He laughed. I've noticed most people don't. You do. I really do. Someone stepped up behind me to buy honey. Gabriel looked apologetically toward them. Duty calls. Of course. As I turned to leave, he called my name again. Julian. I looked back. Next week. Yeah. If you're curious. He smiled. I could show you where the honey actually comes from. For a second I forgot how to answer. You mean? The apiary. You invite random customers to your farm? Only the ones who buy the expensive honey twice. I laughed. So I earned it. You qualified. I nodded. I'd like that. As I walked away, I couldn't stop smiling. For reasons I couldn't explain, visiting a beekeeper suddenly sounded like the best plan I'd made in months. The entire week felt strangely longer than usual. Not because I had a deadline. Not because work had suddenly become stressful. Because every few hours I'd catch myself thinking about Gabriel's invitation. It was ridiculous. I'd known him for exactly 2 Saturday mornings. We'd spent maybe 30 minutes talking in total. And yet the idea of seeing where he worked had somehow become the highlight of my week. By Friday evening, I actually laughed at myself. You need to get out more, I muttered while making dinner. The next morning, I arrived at the market earlier than usual. Gabriel was already setting up. Instead of jars, he was unloading wooden crates from the back of an old pickup truck. He noticed me before I reached the stand. Right on time. I wasn't sure if the invitation was still valid. It is. He glanced at the nearly empty market. I just need another 20 minutes. I can wait. You don't mind? I came here for this. The words escaped before I thought about them. For a split second, he looked almost surprised. Then he smiled. I'm glad. While he arranged the last jars, I wandered around the market pretending to browse. When I came back, he'd already packed away the cash box. Ready? That's it. That's it. You closed this early? My sister takes over around noon. Almost on cue, a woman carrying several baskets walked toward us. She looked enough like Gabriel that I recognized the family resemblance immediately. Same eyes. Same easy smile. You must be Julian. I blinked. Gabriel looked guilty. I might have mentioned you. His sister laughed. You definitely mentioned you. She offered her hand. I'm Emma. Nice to meet you. She glanced between us with an expression that instantly made Gabriel sigh. Emma. What? I know that look. I don't know what you're talking about. You absolutely do. She grinned at me. He's been talking about someone who accidentally spent $20 on honey. Heat rushed to my face. Gabriel rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't tell that story to embarrass you. You absolutely did. No. I was proud. Emma laughed so hard she nearly dropped one of the baskets. I like him already. I've noticed. Gabriel grabbed a small cooler from behind the stand. We should probably leave before my sister invents another conversation. I already have 3. I know. As we walked toward his truck, I looked over at him. So, you talked about me? A little. Why? He opened the passenger door for me. You were interesting. I bought honey. You ask questions. That's your definition of interesting? He started the engine. You actually listened. The drive took a little under half an hour. The town slowly disappeared behind us, replaced by winding roads, open fields, and patches of forest. I rolled down the window. The air smelled completely different. Fresh grass, warm earth, something sweet I couldn't identify. Gabriel noticed. Can you smell the clover? That's what that is. He nodded. The bees love it. You can actually tell? I spend enough time outside. You really don't miss city life? He looked genuinely confused. I visit sometimes. And I usually want to leave after 2 hours. I laughed. That's a very specific limit. Traffic. Fair. Parking. Also fair. Too many people. I see your point. He smiled. I don't hate cities. You just don't belong there. He glanced at me. I don't think I ever did. His farm wasn't large. It felt lived in. A white farmhouse with green shutters. Several old barns. Fields stretching behind them. Rows of wildflowers planted along wooden fences. And farther away, dozens of neat white boxes arranged in long rows. I pointed toward them. Those are the hives. Yep. There are so many. 94. You know the exact number. I built most of them. Of course he did. He parked near one of the barns before turning toward me. Before we get close, he reached behind the seat. You'll need this. He handed me a lightweight protective jacket with a mesh veil attached. I unfolded it. This makes me look ridiculous. It makes you look alive. I suppose that's better. He laughed. Trust me. A few minutes later, we were walking toward the apiary. The sound reached me before we got close. A low, constant humming. Not loud. Not threatening. Just alive. Thousands of tiny wings moving together. I stopped walking for a second. I've never heard anything like this. Gabriel looked toward the hives with a smile so natural, it almost seemed unconscious. I know. You actually like this sound. I love it. He spoke quietly now, almost respectfully. They're working. The closer we got, the more fascinated I became. Bees moved in steady streams around each hive. Landing, leaving, returning. None of it looked chaotic. It looked organized, purposeful. Gabriel opened one hive with practiced movements. Every gesture was calm, unhurried. You never seem nervous. They can tell. They can. If I'm tense. He shrugged. They become tense. So you stay calm. I try. I watched him lift one of the wooden frames. It shimmered with hundreds of bees moving across perfect honeycomb. I expected to feel nervous. Instead, I found myself watching Gabriel. The way he handled every frame carefully. The quiet concentration on his face. The small smile every time he noticed something. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't performing. This was simply where he belonged. He looked up. What? I keep staring. Don't I? A little. Sorry. He shook his head. I don't mind. His eyes stayed on mine a moment longer than necessary. Then he looked back at the hive. This colony's doing really well. You can tell just by looking. I can tell they're healthy. How? He smiled. That's a much longer conversation. I've got time. I was hoping you'd say that. For the next hour, he explained everything. Queens. Workers. Drones. How bees communicated. Why they danced. Why some flowers produced better honey than others. I asked dozens of questions. He answered every single one without ever sounding impatient. Eventually, we sat beneath a large oak tree overlooking the hives. Gabriel opened the cooler he'd brought. Inside were sandwiches, apples, and 2 bottles of lemonade. You planned lunch. I figured you'd get hungry. You were confident I'd come. I was. I laughed. You're confident about a lot of things. Only the important ones. We ate quietly for a while. The humming from the apiary drifted across the field. It was strangely peaceful. I've never had a job I could explain with that much excitement, I admitted. Gabriel looked thoughtful. What made you become a designer? I like drawing. And now? I mostly redesign company logos because someone wants them 2% larger. He laughed. I wish I were joking. Do you still enjoy it? The question lingered longer than I expected. I don't know. He nodded slowly. I think that's an answer. I looked out toward the hives. You know? What? I came here expecting to learn about bees. And I think I learned more about being happy. Gabriel didn't answer immediately. A gentle breeze moved through the trees above us. Finally, he smiled. I've had people compliment the honey. He looked at me. But nobody's ever said that before. For some reason, hearing that made my chest feel unexpectedly warm. After lunch, Gabriel offered to show me the rest of the property. There wasn't anything flashy about it. No polished visitor center. No carefully planned tour. Just the place where he lived. We walked slowly along a dirt path behind the farmhouse. On one side stretched rows of lavender buzzing with bees. On the other were old apple trees that looked like they'd been there longer than either of us. My grandfather planted these, Gabriel said, resting his hand against one of the trunks. How old are they? Older than my parents. You grew up here? He nodded. I learned to ride a bike on this path. And the bees. My grandfather gave me my first tiny hive when I was 12. 12. I thought I knew everything. You didn't. He laughed. I almost dropped the entire frame because I was trying to impress him. Did he yell? Gabriel smiled to himself. No. What did he do? He laughed. That was it. He told me that bees don't care whether you're confident. I looked at him. They only care whether you're careful. He looked toward the apiary. I've never forgotten that. We continued walking. The conversation became easier with every minute. Not because we were asking deeper questions, because silence no longer felt necessary to fill. Sometimes we'd simply walk for 30 seconds without speaking. It wasn't awkward. It felt comfortable. Eventually, we reached an old wooden bench overlooking a meadow filled with wildflowers. Gabriel sat first. I joined him. This is my favorite place. I can see why. The breeze carried the scent of lavender across the field. Somewhere nearby, birds called back and forth. It felt impossibly quiet. I used to think this place was boring, Gabriel admitted. You? When I was 18. What changed? I left. I looked over. You moved away? For college. And I spent 2 years convincing myself I wanted a different life. What happened? I came home for one weekend. He smiled faintly. My grandfather asked if I wanted to help with the spring harvest. You said yes. I forgot to leave. I laughed. Just like that. Pretty much. No dramatic realization. He shook his head. I simply noticed I was happier here. There was something incredibly honest about the way he spoke. No attempt to make his story sound more impressive than it was. Sometimes life changed quietly. I admire that, I said. What? You figured it out. I don't think anyone ever completely figures it out. You figured out enough. He looked at me thoughtfully. What about you? What about me? When were you happiest? The question caught me completely off guard. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Nothing came. Gabriel didn't rush me. He simply waited. Finally, I laughed awkwardly. That's surprisingly difficult. He nodded once. I noticed. I can tell you moments. Like college graduation. Okay. My first apartment. Good. The day I adopted my dog. His smile widened. You have a dog? I did. The smile softened immediately. He passed away 2 years ago. I'm sorry. So am I. We sat quietly for a moment. He was 13. I'll bet he had a good life. He really did. Gabriel nodded. I can usually tell when someone loved their dog. How? They always smile before they get sad. I stared at him. You're very observant. I spend most of my day watching tiny insects. Fair point. I laughed. I guess you get good at noticing things. I notice people too. His voice had become quieter. I noticed you looked lonely the first day. I looked down at my hands. Was it that obvious? Only because I know the feeling. That surprised me. You? I live alone. He shrugged lightly. Most of my friends moved away. I assumed. What? I don't know. I smiled sheepishly. You seem like someone who's constantly surrounded by people. I spend most days surrounded by about 4 million bees. I walked right into that one. You did. We both laughed. Then the silence returned. This time it felt different. More personal. I moved here hoping things would slow down, I admitted. Have they? My schedule has. And you? I thought about it. Not really. He nodded as though he'd expected that answer. I keep thinking I'm supposed to know what comes next. Next? In life. He picked up a small wildflower growing beside the bench and rolled the stem between his fingers. My grandfather used to say something. What? If you're always looking at the next season. He glanced toward the hives. You stop noticing the one you're standing in. I smiled. He sounds wise. He was. You miss him. Every day. He didn't say it dramatically. Just honestly. We stayed there until the afternoon sun began dropping lower. Eventually, Gabriel stood. I should probably get you back before you decide I kidnapped you. I was starting to wonder. Were you? Not really. On the drive back to town, the conversation stayed light. Favorite movies. Music. Terrible cooking attempts. The kind of conversations that slowly build familiarity without either person noticing. When we reached the market parking lot, neither of us moved to get out immediately. Gabriel rested both hands on the steering wheel. So, I had a really good day. I smiled. So did I. I'm glad you came. I'm glad you invited me. Another brief silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, just hesitant. I usually come into town on Wednesdays, he said. For supplies. Okay. There's a little cafe near the bookstore. I know it. They make terrible coffee. I laughed. That's quite an invitation. But excellent cinnamon rolls. Much better. He looked at me with an almost shy smile. If you're free. There it was. Not exactly a date. Not exactly not one. I'd like that. His smile grew just enough for me to notice. Good. As I stepped out of the truck, I closed the door, then leaned back toward the open window. Gabriel. Yeah. I still forgot to buy tomatoes. He stared at me for half a second before laughing so hard, he had to lower his head onto the steering wheel. I knew it. You knew what? You never came to the market for vegetables. This time, I couldn't argue with him. Because somewhere between the honey, the bees, and a quiet afternoon beneath an oak tree, I had completely forgotten I'd ever pretended otherwise. Wednesday arrived with far more anticipation than I was willing to admit. I checked the time 3 separate times before leaving the house. Changed my shirt twice. Then told myself I was being ridiculous. It was coffee. Well, technically cinnamon rolls. That sounded much less intimidating. The cafe sat on the corner across from the bookstore, exactly where Gabriel had said it would be. It looked small from the outside. Inside, it smelled like fresh bread, coffee, and cinnamon. I arrived 10 minutes early. Gabriel was already there. Of course he was. He sat near the window, reading something that looked more like a farming magazine than anything I'd ever voluntarily pick up. When he noticed me, his face brightened immediately. You're early. So are you. I've been here 15 minutes. I've been outside pretending not to look through the window. That made him laugh. I wondered why someone kept walking past. You noticed? I notice a lot. I really need to remember that. I sat across from him. Without asking, he slid a cinnamon roll toward me. I ordered before you got here. You were confident I'd come. He smiled. I'm beginning to trust my instincts. I looked at the enormous pastry. This thing could feed 4 people. It could. You bought 2. I know. I shook my head. I like your optimism. I've seen you eat. You've seen me eat once. It was convincing. I laughed. The conversation flowed almost immediately. Without the market around us or the farm to explore, we simply talked. About everything. About nothing. He asked about my work. I asked about the busiest season for honey. He told me spring always felt hopeful. I admitted I secretly hated video meetings. At one point, he looked out the window. I like this. The cinnamon roll? No. He looked back at me. This. The simple word landed somewhere unexpectedly deep. Me too. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence afterward. Eventually, I noticed several people greeting Gabriel as they walked by outside. He waved every time. You know everyone. Not everyone. It feels like everyone. He smiled. Small towns do that. Does it ever get annoying? Sometimes. He took a sip of coffee. But mostly. He shrugged. It's nice belonging somewhere. I thought about that. Belonging. It wasn't a word I'd used much. I've moved 5 times in 8 years. He looked genuinely surprised. That many. I always thought the next place would feel more like home. And did it? No. He nodded slowly. My grandfather used to say home isn't something you find. I smiled. Let me guess. You build it. He pointed at me. You would have liked him. I think I already do. His smile lingered for a second longer than usual. So, I leaned back in my chair. Do you always quote your grandfather? More than I realize. I don't think that's a bad thing. It used to bother me. Why? I worried I'd never become my own person. And now, he looked out toward the street again. I realized carrying someone's wisdom isn't the same as living their life. For a while we watched people pass outside. Parents pushing strollers. Teenagers laughing. Someone walking an enormous golden retriever that seemed determined to greet every human it encountered. You miss having a dog. I looked back at Gabriel. How did you? You smiled again. I laughed quietly. I'm starting to think you have some kind of superpower. No. You absolutely do. I just pay attention. Same difference. He smiled but didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his backpack. I brought something. He placed a small glass jar on the table. It wasn't honey. At least, not entirely. Inside floated pieces of honeycomb. I picked it up carefully. What is this? Comb honey. I've never seen it before. You said you like trying new things. I did. So, he pushed it slightly closer. I saved one. For me. He nodded. You don't have to. I wanted to. The gesture felt unexpectedly personal. Not expensive. Just thoughtful. I don't know how to repay you. You already did. How? You listened. I smiled. I've never considered that a gift. It is. The sincerity in his voice left me unexpectedly speechless. After another hour, we finally stood to leave. Outside, the afternoon had turned warm. Neither of us seemed eager to end the conversation. So I said, So, I should probably pretend to work this afternoon. Gabriel nodded. I should actually work. Bees. Bees. We started walking toward the parking lot together. Halfway there, he stopped beside a flower bed overflowing with bright yellow blooms. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you came to the market the first time, he hesitated. Did you really just stop because of the honey? I looked at him. He wasn't teasing. He genuinely wanted to know. I could have lied. Instead, I smiled. No. His eyebrows lifted slightly. I noticed you. For just a moment, he looked completely caught off guard. Really? You looked. I searched for the right word. Happy. He blinked. I don't think anyone's ever said that's the first thing they noticed about me. It was. He looked down with a small, almost embarrassed smile. Can I tell you something too? Please. I noticed you because. He laughed softly at himself. You look like someone trying very hard to convince himself he was only shopping. I groaned. I wasn't nearly as subtle as I thought. Not even a little. I should have known. You kept pretending to compare tomatoes while looking at my stand. I did not. You absolutely did. I can't believe you saw that. I saw everything. I covered my face with one hand. That's embarrassing. I thought it was adorable. The word hung gently between us. Neither of us looked away. For a heartbeat, the entire parking lot seemed to disappear. No traffic. No people. Just Gabriel smiling at me with an expression that was somehow both shy and completely certain. Then someone called his name from across the street. He glanced over. I should. Yeah. But. He looked back at me. Would you maybe want to come to dinner this weekend? My heart reacted before my brain could. I'd like that. A smile spread across his face so naturally that I realized something. It wasn't only me looking forward to seeing him again. He'd been hoping I'd say yes. I spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to bring. Showing up empty-handed felt wrong. Bringing something expensive felt even worse. After standing in my kitchen for almost 10 minutes, I settled on a loaf of fresh bread from the bakery in town and a bottle of homemade apple cider I'd found at the market the week before. Simple. Hopefully normal. Gabriel opened the front door before I even reached the porch. I was about to come outside. You saw me? I heard your car. That's impressive. He smiled. I know the sound of every vehicle that comes down this road. I forgot where I was. You'll get used to it. His eyes dropped to the bag in my hand. You brought something. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to. You weren't. I know. He laughed. But I'm glad you did. The house looked different than it had during my first visit. Warmer. Maybe because I wasn't there as a guest touring the farm. I was there because he'd invited me to dinner. Music played quietly from the kitchen. Something instrumental. The windows were open, letting in the cool evening air. It smells incredible. Gabriel looked almost sheepish. I've been cooking all afternoon. You cook? I have to eat. That's not the same thing. He smiled. I enjoy it. I shouldn't be surprised. You expected frozen meals? I expected someone who spends 12 hours outside to be too tired. I usually am. He shrugged. But cooking helps me slow down. He disappeared into the kitchen for a moment before returning with 2 glasses of lemonade. I should warn you. About what? My cooking. No. He grinned. My neighbor has absolutely no sense of timing. As if summoned by the sentence, someone knocked on the open screen door. Gabriel sighed dramatically. There he is. An older man stepped onto the porch carrying a basket overflowing with tomatoes. He stopped when he noticed me. Oh, Gabriel smiled. Julian, this is my neighbor, Frank. Frank extended a weathered hand. So you're the honey customer. I looked at Gabriel. You've been talking about me to everyone. Gabriel rubbed the back of his neck. Apparently. Frank laughed. He hasn't stopped. I have not. You absolutely have. Frank set the basket on the kitchen counter. He even smiled while repairing a fence last Tuesday. Gabriel looked horrified. I smile. Not while fixing fences. Frank turned back to me. That's how I knew something was different. Heat crept into Gabriel's face. Frank, I'm leaving. You should. Frank grinned at both of us. Good meeting you, Julian. You too. As soon as the truck disappeared down the driveway, Gabriel covered his face with both hands. I'm never recovering from that. I couldn't stop laughing. I thought Emma was bad. They're all like this. Everyone. It's a small community. He sighed. They've all decided they're invested in my happiness. I think that's kind of sweet. It is. He smiled despite himself. It's also impossible to escape. Dinner turned out to be homemade pasta with roasted vegetables from his garden. I took one bite, then looked at him. What? This is unfair. He frowned. What is? You're good at everything. He laughed. I'm definitely not. You make honey. I do. You cook. Sometimes. You grow half your ingredients. Mostly. You probably built the table too. He looked down. I did. I stared at him. You actually did? It was winter. You needed a hobby? I had leftover oak. I shook my head. This is becoming unreasonable. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped his fork. I promise I'm terrible at plenty of things. Name one. He thought for a moment. I can't keep houseplants alive. I blinked. Seriously? They die. All of them. Every single one. How? I honestly don't know. I laughed. You keep 94 bee colonies alive. 96 now. You added 2? This week. And yet, I killed a cactus. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my drink. A cactus. It lasted 3 weeks. I don't think I've ever heard anything more ironic. Emma still reminds me. I don't think I'm ever going to let that go either. You've known me 3 weeks. I already know this story will stay with me forever. After dinner, we carried our glasses onto the porch. The sky had begun turning shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the distance, crickets had started singing. Gabriel leaned against the wooden railing. This is my favorite time of day. Sunset. The quiet afterward. I listened. The farm had changed. The buzzing from the apiary had softened. The wind moved gently through the trees. It felt like the entire property was exhaling. I understand now. What? Why you stayed? He looked at me. I wasn't sure anyone else would. I think I would have left the city too. He smiled. You still might. I might. The words surprised both of us. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, Gabriel asked quietly, Do you miss it? The city? He nodded. I thought honestly before answering. No. When did that happen? I looked across the fields. I think. I smiled to myself. Around the time someone spent 40 minutes explaining why bees dance. Gabriel laughed softly. I really talked for 40 minutes. Closer to an hour. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. I looked at him. It was one of the best conversations I've had in years. His smile faded into something quieter, more thoughtful. I've been meaning to tell you something. Okay. The first Saturday. He rested his forearms on the railing. After you left. I waited. I kept wondering if you'd come back. My heart skipped. You did. He nodded. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself the same thing. He smiled. I figured you'd forgotten about me by Monday. I was thinking about you on Monday. His eyes met mine. Tuesday too. I laughed quietly. I spent half the week wondering if I was inventing whatever this is. He let out a slow breath. So did I. The honesty between us felt almost fragile. No dramatic declarations. No sweeping speeches. Just two people admitting that the other had quietly become part of their thoughts. I like spending time with you, Julian. His voice was almost lost beneath the evening breeze. I like spending time with you too. He looked relieved, as though he'd been carrying those words around for days. Then he smiled. Not the easy smile he'd worn at the market. Not the amused smile from dinner. This one was smaller, more vulnerable, and somehow, it suited him even better. The light faded slowly. Neither of us made any move to go back inside. It wasn't that there was more to say. It was that neither of us seemed ready for the evening to end. Gabriel rested his elbows on the porch railing and looked toward the fields. You know what's funny? What? I usually eat dinner out here alone. I glanced at him. Does it bother you? Sometimes. He smiled faintly. Sometimes it feels peaceful. And the other times? He took a moment before answering. I catch myself wanting someone to tell about my day. I understood that feeling better than I wanted to admit. I talked to myself. I confessed. He looked at me with obvious amusement. You do? When I'm working. What do you say? That logo looked better an hour ago. He laughed. Who approved this font? He laughed harder. Julian, don't send that email yet. He covered his face, still laughing. I knew I liked you. I've been working alone for years. I talked to the bees. I looked at him. Seriously? They're excellent listeners. Do they give feedback? Only when I deserve it. I'll assume that means stings. Exactly. We stood there smiling at each other. It struck me how easy everything felt. There was no pressure to impress him. No awkward guessing game about what to say next. Conversation simply happened. A shooting star crossed the darkening sky. I almost missed it. Gabriel didn't. There. I looked up too late. I missed it. It was quick. You've probably seen hundreds out here. I still look every time. I smiled. You really don't stop appreciating things. He tilted his head. I try not to. The porch light clicked on automatically. Warm yellow light spilled across the wooden floorboards. For the first time that evening, Gabriel looked slightly nervous. There was actually another reason I invited you tonight. Oh, he disappeared inside for a moment. When he came back, he was carrying a small wooden box. It wasn't polished. The corners were slightly uneven. I made this years ago. He handed it to me. Inside were 6 tiny jars of honey, each one a different shade. Gold, amber, almost brown. A small handwritten label sat beneath each jar. Spring clover, wildflower, black locust, basswood, goldenrod, buckwheat. I looked up. Gabriel, I wanted to show you how different each season tastes. You made this. He nodded. I give one to people who become important to me. The words settled gently between us. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. I looked back down at the little wooden box. You carved this. During my first winter back on the farm. It's beautiful. He smiled. It isn't perfect. I don't think it needs to be. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I closed the lid carefully. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. But I want to. I took a slow breath. I haven't felt comfortable with someone this quickly in a very long time. His eyes met mine. I was worried it was only me. It definitely isn't. He let out a quiet laugh, almost relieved. Good. I've been finding excuses to come into town. I smiled. I suspected that. You did. You somehow needed supplies every Wednesday. He looked caught. I may have stretched the definition of needed. I thought so. And you? What about me? You've suddenly become very interested in honey. I laughed. I currently own more honey than any single person should. Exactly. I don't even use that much. So why keep buying it? I held his gaze. I think you already know. His smile was small, but impossible to miss. I was hoping. The evening air had turned cooler. A breeze lifted the leaves of the maple tree beside the porch. Almost without thinking, we both stepped toward the front steps at the same time. Our shoulders brushed lightly. We both stopped. For a second, neither of us spoke. Gabriel looked at me with the same careful expression he'd worn that afternoon beneath the oak tree. Can I ask you one more question? You've earned at least one. He smiled. When you said you noticed I looked happy. Yeah. What did you mean? I thought about it. Not for an answer that sounded clever. For the truthful one. I think. I looked out across the quiet farm before returning my eyes to him. I've spent years meeting people who were waiting for their lives to begin. He listened without interrupting. You weren't waiting. I smiled softly. You were already living yours. Gabriel's expression changed in a way I hadn't seen before. His eyes softened. Not because of the compliment. Because he believed I meant it. Quietly, he said, I'm really glad you stopped at my stand. I smiled. I'm really glad I forgot to buy tomatoes. This time, instead of laughing immediately, he simply looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled the same way he had the day we met. Warm, easy, and somehow, it felt like the beginning of something neither of us wanted to rush. After that evening, something shifted. Not dramatically. No sudden declarations. No impossible coincidence that changed everything overnight. It was quieter than that. We simply started becoming part of each other's lives. I found myself looking forward to Wednesdays and Saturdays without pretending there was another reason. Sometimes I'd work from home until noon, close my laptop, and drive into town because Gabriel happened to be picking up supplies. Sometimes he'd text me. Just one sentence. The basswood honey is finally ready. Or, the first sunflowers opened today. None of those messages required an answer. I always replied anyway. One Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was in the middle of an exhausting meeting. Gabriel, do you know anything about graphic design? I smiled despite myself. Me. That's literally my job. Almost immediately. Gabriel, right. That was a stupid question. Me, what's wrong? A picture appeared. It showed a rough sketch of a label for his honey jars. Handwritten. Simple. Very Gabriel. Gabriel. Emma says it looks old-fashioned. Me, it does. Several dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Gabriel, that's not encouraging. I laughed out loud. 3 people in the meeting looked at me. I muted my microphone. Me, it's charming. Gabriel, that's what people say when something is ugly. Me, absolutely not. Gabriel, be honest. I looked at the sketch again. It wasn't ugly. It simply wasn't finished. Me, can I help? There was a longer pause this time. Gabriel, I'd like that. So Saturday, after the market closed, Instead of driving back to the farm immediately, we spread papers across one of the picnic tables behind the market. Gabriel brought pencils. I brought my laptop. Within 20 minutes, we discovered something. He was excellent at explaining exactly what he wanted, terrible at drawing it. I swear the bee looked better in my head. I turned the sketch toward him. It looks enthusiastic. He laughed. Enthusiastic? I'm trying to be supportive. It looks like a potato with wings. I wasn't going to say that. You were thinking it. I absolutely was. He leaned closer to my laptop as I adjusted the design. What if the flower was smaller? I made it smaller. No. You don't like it? I liked the first version better. I switched back. Oh. He nodded immediately. That's it. You decided very quickly. I know what feels right. I looked over at him. You say things like that a lot. He looked confused. What do you mean? You don't overcomplicate decisions. I used to. What changed? He leaned back on the bench. I realized perfect usually arrives too late. I smiled. That's unexpectedly profound. My grandfather again. I figured. By late afternoon, we had finished the label. Simple cream background. A small illustration of a bee. His farm's name beneath it. Nothing flashy. It looked exactly like something Gabriel would make. He stared at the screen for almost a full minute. I love it. You really do? He nodded without hesitation. It still feels like me. That was the goal. He looked over at me. I couldn't have done this. Sure you could. Not like this. He closed my laptop gently. Thank you. There was something about the way he said it. Not polite. Personal. Like I'd given him more than a design. So, I stood, stretching my back. Payment. He narrowed his eyes. I knew there'd be a catch. I charge 1 cinnamon roll. Only 1. I'm being generous. I think I can manage that. We packed everything into our bags. As we walked toward our cars, Emma appeared from the opposite side of the market carrying several empty crates. She looked from Gabriel to me, to the laptop bag, then smiled in a way that instantly made Gabriel groan. What? Emma looked entirely innocent. Nothing. I know that face. I just think it's nice. What is? You've been smiling for almost a month. Gabriel sighed. Emma. No, seriously. She looked at me. He used to finish market days completely exhausted. I still do. You come home exhausted, she corrected. But happy. Gabriel looked down at the pavement. I couldn't tell if he was embarrassed or simply overwhelmed by being known so well. Emma smiled gently this time. No teasing. No jokes. Just warmth. I'm glad you found each other. For a moment, nobody spoke. Gabriel finally looked up. So am I. The words were simple, quiet. But when our eyes met, I knew he hadn't said them only to his sister. He'd said them to me too. Autumn arrived almost without us noticing. The market filled with pumpkins instead of strawberries. The lavender fields faded into softer colors. The evenings grew colder, which somehow made Gabriel's farmhouse feel even warmer. By then, I had stopped introducing the place in my head as Gabriel's farm. It had quietly become somewhere I belonged. Not because I lived there, because every road leading to it felt familiar. One Saturday, after we finished packing away the last honey jars, Gabriel leaned against his truck. You busy tomorrow? I don't think so. Good. He smiled. I want to show you something. The next afternoon, he drove farther than we'd ever gone before. Past the apiary, past the orchards, past fields I'd never seen. Eventually, we reached a small hill overlooking nearly the entire valley. The farmhouse looked tiny from there. The hives were little white dots. The trees had turned shades of gold and deep orange. We sat in the grass without saying much. You've brought me here before, I said. He shook his head. Not here. Why today? He smiled to himself. My grandfather used to come here whenever he had something important to think about. And today, I don't need to think anymore. I looked at him. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't rehearsing words. He simply looked peaceful. I spent a long time believing my life would always be this place. He gestured toward the farm below. The bees. The fields. The house. It still is. It is. He nodded. But somewhere along the way, he looked directly at me. I realized home wasn't just where I woke up anymore. My chest tightened. He continued quietly. I kept waiting for the right moment to tell you. You don't have to rush. I'm not. He smiled. I just don't want to leave important things unsaid. The breeze carried the scent of dry grass across the hill. I love this farm. He looked toward the valley. I always will. Then he looked back at me. But somewhere between selling you your first jar of honey. He laughed softly. and listening to you complain about fonts. I laughed too. I fell in love with you. The world became impossibly quiet. No dramatic music. No perfect sunset. Just wind moving through the tall grass. For a second, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't know the answer. Because I'd known it for weeks. Maybe longer. I smiled before I even realized I was doing it. I've been trying very hard not to say that first. Gabriel blinked. You have. I wasn't sure if I was imagining everything. So was I. I think. I laughed quietly. We've both been doing a lot of unnecessary worrying. He nodded. Probably. I reached for his hand. Not because it felt like a grand romantic gesture. Because it felt completely natural. Our fingers intertwined easily, as though they'd already learned where they belonged. I love you too. His eyes closed for a brief second. Not dramatically, just with quiet relief. When he opened them again, he was smiling in that same calm, genuine way I'd first noticed across a table full of honey jars. You know, he said. What? You still owe me tomatoes. I laughed. I can't believe you remembered. I'll remember that forever. I've bought honey every week for months. I know. And somehow I still forget vegetables. You've become a very predictable customer. I think that's your fault. I'll accept responsibility. We stayed on that hill until the sun began to disappear. On the drive back, neither of us talked much. We didn't need to. Some silences feel empty. Others feel full. This one was filled with everything we no longer had to wonder about. A few weeks later, the market was busier than usual. I was helping Emma stack jars while Gabriel spoke with customers. An older woman picked up a jar of dark honey. Which one do you recommend? Before Gabriel could answer, I smiled. The dark one. She looked at me. Why? I glanced across the stand. Gabriel looked up at exactly the same moment. Our eyes met. Because someone once spent 10 minutes explaining why it tasted deeper. Gabriel laughed. I did say that. You did. The woman bought the jar. After she left, Gabriel leaned closer. You've become a terrible influence. How? You sound like a beekeeper now. I've learned from the best. Emma walked past carrying another crate. Without looking up, she said, I told you he'd stay. Gabriel smiled. So did I. Months earlier, I'd gone to the market looking for tomatoes. Instead, I found a man who loved the life he'd built, who could spend an hour talking about bees without noticing the time, who believed happiness was something you practiced instead of chased. I thought I was moving to the countryside to escape the noise. What I actually found was someone who taught me how to be still. Sometimes the biggest changes don't arrive with dramatic speeches or impossible coincidences. Sometimes they begin with a jar of honey, a forgotten shopping list, and a beekeeper who smiled like he was already exactly where he was meant to be. Looking back, I never did remember to buy those tomatoes. And I've never been happier about forgetting them.